What turned terror into a brand? Vlad the Impaler, the psychology of fear-based marketing. What if one ruler turned fear into a brand so powerful that entire armies surrendered without drawing a sword? Vlad the Impaler didn't just kill his enemies, he crafted a psychological weapon that shattered minds across continents, a legacy that still manipulates us today. His name alone could silence a room, his reputation a force that conquered before battles began. From medieval Wallachia to modern corporate boardrooms and social media feeds, Vlad's terror tactics reveal how fear can be packaged and sold to control millions. Let's dive into his fear brand manufacturing plant and uncover how he turned dread into a timeless tool of power and why it still shapes our world. In the 15th century, Wallachia was a small, vulnerable principality, trapped between the relentless Ottoman Empire and the scheming kingdoms of Europe. Vlad III, born in 1431 in Transylvania, inherited a throne under constant threat. The Ottomans, with their vast armies and brutal conquests, had already swallowed neighboring Serbia and Bulgaria, leaving a trail of devastation. One wrong decision could end Wallachia, thousands impaled, enslaved, or erased from history. The stakes were existential, not just for Vlad, but for every soul he ruled. His desperate fight against overwhelming odds demanded more than swords or soldiers. It required a weapon that could strike the mind before the body. This struggle exposes the brutal reality of unchecked power and the lengths one man would go to protect his people through terror. Could fear alone turn the tide against an empire, or would it forge a legacy of horror that haunts for centuries? As Vlad's situation deteriorated from an outnumbered prince to a vengeful ruler, his early hopes of diplomacy crumbled under the weight of betrayal. European allies, like Hungary's nobility, turned their backs, offering empty promises while Ottoman forces pressed closer. Internal rivals, Wallachian boyars, plotted his downfall, undermining his rule. His initial efforts to negotiate peace with the Sultan failed, leaving him isolated in a sea of enemies. This transformation, from protector to predator, reveals how survival can twist a leader into a monster, using fear to dominate minds rather than battlefields. What happens when desperation turns a ruler's heart to darkness, creating a legacy that echoes through time? Vlad III, known to history as Dracula, was no ordinary ruler. Born in 1431, he was sent as a child hostage to the Ottoman court in 1442, a bargaining chip to secure his father's loyalty. At just 11, he endured years of captivity, witnessing the Ottomans' ruthless tactics, public executions, floggings, and displays of power designed to break spirits. These formative experiences shaped his understanding of fear as a tool of control. When he reclaimed Wallachia's throne in 1456, at age 25, he faced a grim reality. His small nation was a pawn in a larger game, betrayed by European allies like the Hungarians and besieged by Ottoman forces under Mehmed the Conqueror. With a limited army and an empty treasury, conventional warfare was not an option. Vlad turned to psychological warfare, creating a brand of terror that would outlast his enemies and echo through history as the legend of Dracula, feared from Constantinople to Venice. Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power, Law 15, Crush Your Enemy Totally, captures Vlad's strategy. He didn't just defeat his foes, he obliterated their will to resist. Impaling wasn't a mere execution method, it was a spectacle crafted to crush hope. Victims were impaled on stakes, their bodies arranged in precise geometric patterns, visible for miles across the Wallachian plains. This wasn't random violence, it was a calculated display of dominance, designed to instill dread in anyone who saw or heard of it. In 1462, Vlad's most infamous act, the Forest of the Impaled, saw 20,000 Ottoman prisoners staked outside the city of Targovishte, arranged in concentric rings to maximize visual horror. The stakes were varied in height, nobles higher, commoners lower, to signal that no one was safe, no matter their status. When the Sultan's army arrived, led by Mehmed himself, they didn't fight, they fled, their morale shattered by the sight. Vlad's terror brand made resistance seem not just futile, but unthinkable. Why would an army of tens of thousands turn tail at the sight of stakes? But how did Vlad ensure his terror reached beyond the battlefield? Cialdini's principle of authority amplified his effect. As Voivode of Wallachia, Vlad's royal title cloaked his cruelty and divine legitimacy, making his actions seem like the will of God. His enemies saw him as an unstoppable force, a ruler whose wrath was ordained. Merchants, diplomats, and soldiers carried tales of his brutality across trade routes, from Constantinople to Venice, spreading his reputation faster than any army could march. These stories weren't accidents. Vlad orchestrated their spread. He invited foreign envoys to witness his executions, knowing they would report back to their courts with horror-filled accounts. He placed stakes along major trade routes, where travelers would see the gruesome displays and recount them in taverns, markets, and courts across Europe. In 1457, Vlad impaled 2,000 Saxon merchants in Brasov for defying his trade agreements, their bodies arranged in a grid pattern to warn other traders. This strategic documentation turned his cruelty into a viral legend, a self-sustaining terror economy that controlled millions without direct contact. The rumors grew with each telling, exaggerating the horrors and amplifying the fear. Vlad's genius lay in understanding that the anticipation of pain was more powerful than pain itself. Modern neuroscience, like Dr. Daniel Kahneman's work on cognitive biases, confirms this. Humans overestimate the probability and intensity of negative outcomes, making imagined threats more terrifying than real ones. Vlad weaponized this evolutionary quirk, creating a psychological factory where fear was mass-produced. His executions were theater, staged for maximum impact. The Forest of the Impaled wasn't just a killing field, it was a marketing campaign. He invited the Sultan to witness it, ensuring the story would spread across empires. The stakes were meticulously designed, arranged in patterns, placed near trade routes, and varied in height to create a visual hierarchy of suffering. This showed methodical planning, not chaotic rage, amplifying the terror beyond the immediate victims. Every detail was crafted to haunt the minds of those who heard the tales, making them feel the dread as if they were standing before the stakes. How does one act of cruelty terrify an entire empire? But why did Vlad's terror brand work so well on such a massive scale? He tailored his displays to specific audiences, merchants who spread tales through trade networks, diplomats who reported to foreign courts, and soldiers who whispered of his wrath before battles. Each act was calibrated for psychological effect, ensuring the story of his cruelty outlived the act itself. In 1459, Vlad impaled 500 disloyal Wallachian boyars in a spiral pattern around his castle, a chilling message to other nobles. Betrayal meant annihilation. The story spread, cowing potential rebels without further bloodshed. In 1460, he targeted rebellious Transylvanian towns, impaling hundreds in public squares to assert dominance, their bodies left as warnings for years. These acts weren't just punishments, they were content, designed to generate stories that traveled faster than armies. Vlad's terror wasn't about killing, it was about creating a reputation that preceded him into every conflict, making enemies surrender before they even fought. What makes a single act ripple across continents? Think of Vlad's methods as a fear brand manufacturing plant. The input, defiant enemies, from Ottoman invaders to disloyal nobles. The process, spectacular impalings paired with strategic storytelling, spread through witnesses and rumors. The output, a broken populace, too terrified to resist. This wasn't chaos, it was a system, a psychological factory where every stake was a production step, churning out dread to fuel his rule. The genius was in the viral amplification. Victims became salespeople, spreading stories that grew more horrific with each retelling. One execution could control millions who never saw it, from a village in Hungary to a court in Vienna or an army in Anatolia. The brand was self-replicating, fed by the human tendency to exaggerate horror in tales. A single stake in Targovishte could terrify a merchant in Venice, a diplomat in Vienna, or a soldier in Constantinople. Vlad's terror brand was so effective it outlived him by centuries. When he died in battle in 1476, fighting the Ottomans near Bucharest, his reputation continued to shape European warfare, inspiring fear long after his last stake was planted. His legend influenced military strategies, with commanders citing his tactics to intimidate foes. It even fueled early vampire myths, which inspired Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula, turning Vlad into a cultural icon of terror. His psychological weapon operated independently, a self-sustaining machine that proved fear-based branding could achieve a kind of immortality no physical force could match. This chilling legacy shows how a single man's cruelty, packaged as a brand, could haunt history for generations, from medieval courts to modern horror tales. How does a reputation become a weapon that never dies, continuing to instill fear long after the man is gone? Today, Vlad's techniques thrive in modern fear-based marketing, refined by technology to control billions. Corporations use his spectacular display tactic through high-profile firings. When a company publicly sacks an employee, it's not just about removal, it's a message to intimidate entire workforces. In 2013, a major tech firm laid off 10,000 workers in a public spectacle, not for financial necessity, but to signal control, ensuring remaining employees feared stepping out of line. The story spread through office gossip, just like Vlad's stakes along trade routes. In 2018, a retail giant fired a whistleblower in a publicized termination, sending a clear message: dissent equals destruction. These acts mirror Vlad's boyar impalings, using fear to enforce loyalty without further action. Political campaigns mirror Vlad's strategic documentation, recording acts of intimidation for social media to amplify fear. Consider modern election ads warning of economic collapse or social chaos if the wrong candidate wins. In 2020, US election ads used apocalyptic imagery to scare voters, echoing Vlad's tactic of making resistance seem impossible. These ads, like Vlad's invitations to the Sultan, spread fear without direct confrontation. During the 2024 global elections, parties in multiple countries posted videos of protests or economic hardship to imply that opposing them would lead to chaos. In the UK, a 2024 campaign ad warned of social collapse if voters didn't comply, using fear to sway undecided minds. This fear-mongering, rooted in Vlad's playbook, makes submission feel like the only logical choice. Social media platforms, like Vlad's rumor networks, use algorithms to push fear-based content that keeps users hooked. News feeds amplify rare but terrifying events, crime, disasters, or political unrest, making them seem more common than they are. A 2021 study showed that fear-driven posts on platforms like X received 3 times more engagement than neutral ones, trapping users in cycles of anxiety, just as Vlad's stories trapped his enemies in dread. This mirrors Vlad's viral amplification, where exaggerated tales controlled populations. Tobacco companies, for instance, used fear of social exclusion in the 1990s to sell cigarettes, convincing teens they'd be outcasts without them. A 1995 campaign showed lonely teens contrasted with cool smokers, turning anticipatory fear into sales, just as Vlad turned fear into power. The most insidious modern parallel is reputational destruction. Instead of physical stakes, today's fearmongers use social ostracism or public shaming to control behavior. Cancel culture, corporate blacklists, or online pile-ons create the same dread Vlad's impalings did. The fear of consequences so severe that submission becomes the only option. In 2022, a public figure was cancelled for a minor misstep, with social media amplifying the outrage to ruin their career. In 2023, a corporate whistleblower was blacklisted across an industry after exposing unethical practices, ensuring others stayed silent, just as Vlad's boyar impalings silenced dissent. On X in 2023, a viral outrage campaign targeted a small business owner for a misinterpreted comment, destroying their livelihood in days. These acts mirror Vlad's use of exaggerated stories to destroy enemies without physical harm. But Vlad's terror brand worked because people couldn't verify the stories they heard. Today, you have the power to resist. The first sign of fear branding is spectacular displays meant to shock rather than solve. A company firing someone publicly to set an example is using Vlad's playbook. Watch for it. Listen for language about sending a message or maintaining order. It's the same justification Vlad used for his stakes. In 2024, a tech CEO justified mass layoffs as a necessary signal to investors, echoing Vlad's logic of public cruelty for control. Most crucially, recognize when your imagination is being weaponized. Fearmongers rely on you imagining worst-case scenarios far worse than reality. Your anticipatory anxiety is their greatest tool, making you submit before they even act. To fight back, seek multiple sources of information. Vlad's victims believed exaggerated tales because they had no way to check them. Today, you can cross-reference news, verify claims, and question whether fears are real or manufactured. A 2023 report showed that 60% of viral news stories about crime on platforms like X were exaggerated, inflating public fear to drive clicks and engagement. Discuss your anxieties with others. Fear loses power when shared. Vlad's brand thrived on isolation. Modern resistance thrives on connection. Join forums, talk to colleagues, or share on X to uncover which fears are real and which are designed to control you. When has fear stopped you from acting? When was it just a story told to manipulate you? Vlad the Impaler didn't just conquer lands, he conquered minds through fear branding. His forest of stakes was theater, designed to make people impale themselves on their own dread. Robert Greene warns of those who use fear to control, but Vlad's story reveals a darker truth. The most effective manipulators don't threaten you directly. They craft reputations that make you terrorize yourself. Have you spotted this in your life? Share a time corporate layoffs, political scare tactics, or social media fear-mongering made you feel trapped? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe for weekly dark psychology revelations and hit the bell to stay ahead. Next, Caligula's dehumanization factory, how turning people into objects destroys societies. Stay aware, stay free.